Well, after back-to-back wins on the road, the Carolina Hurricanes are feeling pretty good these days. In fact, they moved into second place in the Metro and started to put a little bit of space between them and the New Jersey Devils. But the Canes have got some challenges still, and there's some areas that they need to work on if they want to continue to move up in the standings. And of course, joining me today to talk about what they need to do and some of the numbers that are suggesting they've got some serious work to do on the offensive side, of course, Erin Manning and Katie Bartlett. Ladies.
Hi there.
Hello.
Well, as I mentioned, this is great that the Canes have gone on a bit of a run. They're 8-3-1 in their last 12 games. They're playing much, much better. They're definitely starting to show some life in terms of the offensive side of the game as well. But we know that there are some players that are underperforming. We also know that the stats are suggesting that they need to do a lot better on the offensive side of the game. And I thought I'd hand it over to you, Katie, to kick things off.
Well, if you've listened to the podcast before, y'all out there know that I'm a stats person. I like seeing what the numbers say and trying to translate it into what conclusions can be drawn about the team. And recently, my curiosity has tended in the direction of expected goals, because if you ever look at that chart, it always looks like the Canes are doing fantastic. They are at the top, usually number one, but if not number one, top three in the league for expected goals, because their style of offense is to get the puck in and to create opportunities and to put pucks on net, and it makes a whole lot of sense. So the Canes are up there with creating offense. And so if you look on HockeyViz, for example, on the expected goals chart, the bottom axis tells you how many goals that they are creating offensively, expected goals. And then the vertical axis is telling you in inverted order how many expected goals are created against them on defense. And they're always in that top quadrant. It's signature Canes hockey. Right. They create lots of opportunities and they suppress the other team's opportunities. It looks fantastic. They're up there with the best teams in the league. But then there's another chart that you look at on HockeyViz, and it is what they call the finishing and goaltending chart. And it is actual goals scored based on expected goals.
Right.
And the defensive, side has been fine. They haven't been quite as stalwart as they have been in past seasons. But what really got my attention was the offensive numbers, because the Canes are only scoring about 90 goals for every 100 expected goals, which is one of the worst totals in the league. In fact, it is the sixth worst. Only teams like San Jose and the New York Islanders have a worse rate on scoring according to expected goals. And so there is a big finishing problem with the Hurricanes that they need to get worked out, because if their scoring dries up, they're going to repeat the same old mantra once we get to the playoffs of great team, can't score.
Yep.
Well, for sure. And they're, the ability for the Canes to outshoot the opposition has been one of their, calling cards. We haven't seen it as much this year. I think recently we've seen those shot numbers a little closer, but definitely they love to get a lot of shots on net. They like to get it to the point, get shots in where they can get rebounds and get other opportunities in that high danger area. But as you say, they're not scoring on those situations. And in particular, we've looked at folks like Aho and Svechnikov, and they seem to be really struggling.
Yeah, they're definitely struggling. I think Svech is almost a -7 on goals versus expected goals, which is incredibly high. The next closest is Aho, who's a -3 point something as far as expected goals versus goals. So those are two guys that the Canes have to have working and firing, and it's been a puzzle. We kind of expected. Aho does start the season slow, but we're halfway through the season. This is no longer a slow start, and he's still close, if not right there at point per game player. But a lot of his points have come on the power play, or have come in like we saw against Chicago in overtime, or 6-on-5 situations, or shorthanded situations.
Yeah.
It's been everything except 5-on-5. And that's, that's the bread and butter of the Canes. If you're not scoring 5-on-5, you can't expect the other situations to necessarily bail you out in every situation. So they really need to get those two guys rolling, not just with creating chances, but actually finishing chances.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing there, and we look at this Canes run of 8-4-1, their last 13, and we think, boy, this is great. In particular, winning 3 in a row, and I know that was a big mantra of yours, Erin, as well.
Yep.
They're doing it by committee. We've talked about this a lot. Svechnikov, Aho, Natchez are the 3 guys that really have to drive the offense. I mean, obviously Jarvis as well. But those 3 guys are critical. And frankly, I think they've all been underperforming, and in particular Aho. Despite the fact he scores the overtime winner and he sets up a great shorthanded goal the other night, I thought for the most part he was invisible. And he has just not been the dominant player that we're used to. So what about these guys? Natchez, Svechnikov, Aho, what are you thinking?
Well, I think that we've seen some signs of improvement from Svechnikov, but I did notice, he was doing extremely well on Jordan Stahl's wing. He was really helping that line produce, which is something with Stahl and Martinook. Their production can be, they're one of those lines that on Katie's charts that they are always at the top of the expected goals. They create so many chances. They are one of the lower finishing lines, and honestly, we expect that from them because that's not a line you expect to have a lot of high-level finishing. But they, Rod Brindamore has kind of used both Svechnikov and occasionally Seth Jarvis, who's on that line right now, as a little bit of a cheat code to get some more offense out of that line. It was working great with Svechnikov. I thought he was coming back, a little bit into form. And then last night against Dallas, he was having a real rough game. I thought, there were some turnovers, some defensive mistakes, some times when he really should have taken a shot and didn't. And, that's when you hear on a national broadcast, it's always interesting because the national broadcasters will sit there and say, well, gosh, why didn't he take that shot? He had an open net. So, I think I don't know if it's a confidence issue with Svechnikov or what's going on there. But I think that we need to see more consistency, and that's given that he's a young player, we forget, age range wise, he, KK and Jack Drury are all 24 years old.
Yes.
So they're not the oldest players in the league by any means, and consistency can be a struggle for younger players.
Well, just a couple of comments on that. Last night was a terrible game for Svechnikov. He had 2 penalties, which I thought, one of them, I think, in the offensive zone and so on. He just was not sharp at all. And, they had talked about the fact he had 10 hours sleep after coming in from Chicago. So I thought this was a great thing and that he was all ready to go. And I just thought he was totally ineffective. And as you say, made a number of plays and forced passes and other things that I think really were not necessarily in the best interest of the Canes. So I totally agree with you. It's an interesting scenario that's been going on with the Stahl line. I mean, Jordan's got 11 points his last 11 games, so he went on a tear. But they got Svech going, and now they've got Jarvis going. And that's kind of interesting when you think of it because, you don't really expect the offense to come from that unit. But they've been getting it done. And Svech going back with Aho doesn't seem to work well. He doesn't seem to have the magic with Sebastian for whatever reason. And I felt like Jackson Blake was much more effective than both Aho and Svechnikov last night. I thought he was making a lot of great plays on the ice, smart moves, both defensively and offensively. And that's kind of a bad statement when you have to say that the rookie guy out there, and he's a good one, but he's outplaying a couple of key players on the Canes. So I don't know if you saw that as well, but I really was disappointed with the work of that line. And I think generally that line has been not really getting it done.
One thing that I think is interesting with Svech is I think he tries to model his game according to the center he's playing with, which isn't what the Canes need him to be. They need him to be a power forward. They don't need Svech to try to be Aho. But when Svech is playing with Stahl, Stahl's game is a little bit closer to what they need out of Svech. It's more of that tough in the corners, grinding, that power forward that we need. Just Svech has that finishing skill that Stahl doesn't have. But when he's playing a little bit more to that type of Stahl identity instead of the Aho identity, I think that's part of why Svech is more effective there. And if they could just tell Svech, pretend like you're playing with Stahl while you're playing with Aho, then they would start to see the results that they really need out of him, and that we all know he's capable of producing.
Well, the other thing, too, is that we look at, one of the areas that could certainly help his confidence and Aho as well is on the power play. We look at this string they've had, and they haven't been getting the big contributions from these guys, and the power play has been a disaster. I took a look at some interesting numbers, and I thought I'd share them with you today that really tell a story on the power play. And they were talking about it last night, and they said, hey, they've been 1 for 31, and they went 0 for 3 last night, so they're 1 for 34. And I think, basically they've hardly done anything since December. But we look at these numbers. In October, their power play percentage was 29%. And we remember as they kicked off the season, Shane Gostisbehere was just magic out there, and that power play was hitting like crazy. And of course, Marty Necas was really taking advantage of the power play as well. Into November, still 25%, and they were right near the top of the league. So they were sitting close to the top on both power play and penalty kills. So they were looking good. Started to slip a little bit in December. We started to see that towards the middle and end of December. They started to struggle a little bit. And, of course, then Gostisbehere went out. But in December, still 23.7. These are good numbers. These are excellent numbers. But get a load of January. In 11 games, 3.2%.
Oh.
This is a massive drop. This is not even believable that it would go that cold. Yeah, okay, so some of the games, Ghost wasn't there. But that's just a terrible, terrible statement. And, what are we thinking about this? How do they fix this? They have to get a power play going again. And, we remember some of the playoff runs they've had, and the biggest thing that seemed to be the gotcha was, guess what? Power play. So here they are again, and they're struggling with power play, but they're somehow eking out these wins. Sometimes great goaltending, sometimes just team effort. But what are we thinking about the power play? Erin?
I think that it was interesting to hear the national broadcasters commenting on it last night, because it there was a light bulb moment there when they were talking about, I know that we all saw that disastrous 5-on-3 that we were all pulling our hair out about. That was just dreadful. But he said, why aren't they attacking? A good power play attacks the penalty killers, forces them out of position, doesn't just look for the open spaces between the penalty killers, because the penalty killers are also being very, they're moving. A good PK is going to move and force you out of position, just like you're going to try to do to them. And the Canes know that because their penalty kill is excellent. So they know what an excellent penalty kill is going to turn around and do to them. You can't say that they don't have that information. So the light bulb for me, though, was that it goes back to something that I've criticized in the past with the Canes and their power play, and it is that just like 3-on-3 overtime, just like 5-on-5, the Canes value puck possession,
right,
and they value offensive zone time when they're in these other situations, whether at 5-on-5, getting the yellow zone time and having puck possession is the most important thing. That's why the Jordan Stahl line is the best Canes line, because they do that the best. They hold on to the puck and they cycle it and they take shots. The shots may not go anywhere. There may not be a lot of risk involved, but they also don't get a lot of breakaways going the other direction. So that's, we have seen power plays from the Canes where the other team gets a shorthanded chance. That is the one thing they don't want to do, is give up shorthanded chances.
Yes.
But I think that leads to a very conservative approach where they're not moving their feet enough and they're not attacking because they don't have the attacking mindset in the rest of their offensive game. And that goes back to what Katie's talking about with finishing. If they had a more aggressively attacking mindset when they have the puck in the O zone at 5-on-5, it wouldn't suddenly be this foreign concept on the the power play rather, that, oh, hey, we have to attack. And Katie, I think you're the one who pointed out that they have that attacking mindset in exactly one facet of the game, and that is the penalty kill. That is the most exciting point of when you see the penalty killers rushing off with the puck in the other direction, whether they manage to get a shorthanded goal or not. It's the most exciting thing because that's when they have the freedom to have that attacking mentality. So I thought that was interesting that they noticed that on the broadcast, that they said they're not attacking. And I thought, well, that's something that translates across the board because even at 3-on-3, which they've been very good at, they still value that puck possession. They still send Jordan Staal out to take the face off. They still want to start with possession. It's important in that scenario. It really is. But on the power play, you've got 2 minutes. You've got, and each unit has, the first unit has 90 seconds, the second unit, if they're lucky, gets 30. Yeah. Those 90 seconds have to be a fast-moving game. It can't be, well, we're just going to hang on to the puck until you get tired, because that doesn't work.
And to piggyback off of that, the lack of attack mentality means that they're taking a breath in between the different moments. So you'll see someone pass it, and they'll pause, they'll dust it off, they'll take a breath, they'll look before they shoot, before they pass. And that breath that they're taking is allowing the defense to react and to get into those passing lanes, or the goalie to get over to make a save on a shot. And they really need to stop taking a breath. And that goes right to what Erin was saying with the wanting the puck possession, not wanting to make that mistake that leads to the defense being able to get a clear. No, it needs to go fast. You need to start snapping it around. You need to move your feet. You need to get the defense moving their feet, and the goal, not giving the goalie enough time to react. Because if the defense has time to react, the goalie has time to react, then you're just not going to be able to score. And then the other thing is, and we've talked about this in other areas, the Canes have a really weird issue with actually putting the puck on net. It's something like almost 40% of the chances that they take miss the net. And that can be a problem on the power play, because if you get a hard Svech shot that misses the net, it rims around and heads straight out of the zone and creates those opportunities against that the team is scared to give up. So I think those are two of the other things that come from what you're saying, Erin, not having that attacking mentality. They're afraid to take the hard shot because they're missing so much, and they're taking that breath and giving the other team an opportunity to react to them.
I think you're right there. I mean, that when you brought that stat up the other day, that almost 40% of their unblocked shots missed the net. Yeah. I started thinking, well, who's in charge of the offense for the Canes? Do they also train the stormtroopers for Star Wars? Because
that's right.
These are Star Wars level unblocked shot attempts. This is crazy.
Well,
but,
I was just going to say, Erin, that I think you mentioned something about some drills that were used in Montreal to help some of the players get a little bit better with their shooting. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I don't have the exact time in front of me, but it was during a time period when the Montreal Canadiens, who was my other team, of course, they were having a similar issue with finishing and just not getting the goals. They were getting chances and nothing was happening. And on their team, we'll be honest, they have some offensive guys that you can't let that happen. You can't. You've got Cole Caulfield on that team. Laine was not there yet, but he's there now. But when you have, even Nick Suzuki, he's tremendously good at getting the puck on the net. So if you have too many of those guys go cold all at once, it's obviously something they have to fix. And the Montreal media reports in great detail on Habs practices, and they were reporting that Martin St. Louis was using some shooting drills that honestly, they are the kind of things that you would use with Pee Wee players. And they were laughing at that. They were absolutely making fun of that. But then St. Louis had the last laugh because it worked. Whatever they were doing, those little small area drills, there were jokes about a shooter-tutor. I do not know. I'm just going to say right now, I do not know that they actually went that far. I don't think they did. But the kind of drills that they were doing, these little small area close-up drills where they, just run and take a shot kind of things, it's not the kind of thing you would normally see NHL players do. But it got them out of their funk. it got them back to being able to score at 5-on-5, which was the problem that they were having. Seeing how well they're doing this year, they're like probably a year ahead of schedule in terms of pushing for the playoffs. Whether they'll make it or not, of course, is very much up in the air with all the competition in the East. But it's just incredible to me to see that those kinds of approaches, let's take it down, let's tear it down to the basic level, let's find out why so many of our shots are going wide or missing the net. Let's work on those little skills. You're never too old or too professional or too much of a veteran to have the humility to say, hey, something's not working, let's fix it. And I thought that was a great approach. So maybe the Canes need to do something like that.
Well, it's going back to basics is sometimes the way you have to get out of this. Couple of things on the power play from my viewpoint. Clearly, the confidence level is at its lowest. They talked about this in the game last night too, and we've been seeing this repeatedly. Their movement is really not there. They're not flying around the ice like they did early in the season. I mean, you remember they were everywhere. They were handing the puck off, going one side to the other. They were going behind the net. They're doing all kinds of things, and we're not seeing that right now. And I put it back to confidence, and that's kind of how power plays work, right? They get their confidence, and all of a sudden, everything you shoot goes in the net. So they've got to get that confidence back. And I think, your idea of back to basics is probably one of the things they've got to do. They've got to take a step back and they've got to start to look at, just what are the things they need to be doing to try to get better opportunities and not try to wait for the perfect opportunity. Get the puck on net, get some things happening in front, get some folks blocking the goalie's eyes, get them there for rebounds and so on. And I think the Canes have not been particularly good at that lately. And the pucks, it's one and done, right? So, again, I think they've got to do this. And it takes us to the next part of the discussion because I think this is really critical to, how we see the Canes going forward. We saw them as a 500 team for, a long time here, over a month. And just, kind of win one, lose one, whatever. They just couldn't get anything going. We're seeing them win 3. Is this a harbinger of what we're going to see now? Are the Canes ready to start to make a move and make a run? And then, if so, where do we think they're going to go in terms of the playoffs? And why don't you kick that off, Katie?
I certainly hope they're going to go on a run and that this is an indication of good things to come. The one thing I have noticed, though, is if you look back at their games in January and then leading back into December, almost all of their games have been decided by one goal. And the ones that haven't been decided by one goal have been decided by a goal plus an empty net or a couple of goals. I think they only have 1 or 2 losses in that time frame that was by more than 2 goals or 2 goals plus an empty net. And the last time that the Canes won a game by 3 or more goals, which did not include an empty net, was the Islanders game back on December 17th. They just are making their lives so much harder than it needs to be because of the type of team they are. Now, granted, credit to them, they're not getting blown out. So they are doing the work and they are playing that full 60 regardless of whether they're ahead or behind. But I think if they can just, like you said, what if the power play had just converted at like a 12 or 15%, not the 20 something that they did at the beginning of the season, they'd probably have another 3 wins in their pocket from January and late December that would have given them an extra cushion, and they'd be breathing right down the Capitals' necks for first in the Metro or first in the East. So it's not going to take a whole lot. And if they can keep steady with the defense and the goaltending, which the goaltending actually looks like it's trending up.
Absolutely.
And then find that extra goal. They just need that one extra goal each game. Start with the power play, move to 5-on-5, expand from there. I think they're in a really, really good spot to make a big push and to at least enter the 4 Nations break feeling good about themselves. And then other than our guys who are participating, come out of the break rested and raring to go to make that stretch run to the playoffs.
Erin?
I agree with that. Excuse me. I think I was saying all along that I wanted to see them win 3 games in a row, and they have, and we can celebrate. They weren't all pretty wins, but they won 3 games in a row. And I think that, there was a tone in one of Brenda Moore's media availabilities recently where he said he was being a little more balanced. I think the winds helped that. But he said, we are doing all this, and we're not playing our best. It's encouraging that we're starting to win games when we still have room to improve, And I think he said that probably, I don't remember which game that was after, but it was, one of the games where Stahl had done a good bit of the scoring, and he said, we need the other two lines to get involved, the other two of the top 9, because I know that no one's really pushing for the bottom line to do much of anything, but the other two lines in the top 9 really need to be involved. And then what happened after that is that in the last couple of games, we're starting to see the Robinson KK line come back.
Yes.
And when you consider how good that line was for a stretch of 15 games in the beginning of the season, it would be incredibly good for the Canes if that line can find its magic again. I know we're seeing Necas getting more and more comfortable. He had 2 assists last night. I think he likes playing with those two players because they do all of that net front battling, behind the net, scoop out the puck. He doesn't have to be trying to do that too. At the turnover from Robinson on the first goal last night, where he forced the turnover, and then it just helps Necas to have somebody who just essentially gets him the puck. So I'd love to see that line, but I still feel like to get above 500 hockey consistently, we're right back into that conversation about Sebastian Aho. He does need to kick it into a higher gear. However, whether they need to keep trying different line mates with him, whether they need to, I don't know what the answer is, but it needs to happen.
Well, what do you think?
Go ahead, Kate.
What's going on with him?
Before we move on to that, I just want to say something that struck me with Rod's comments about KK last night. Is if he says, I want KK to play more of a straight line game like he did last night. And I was thinking about that. Because normally you hear like a north-south game, but he said a straight line game. Necas is such a creative player. Like you said, Erin, Robinson is the one that gets in there, creates the turnovers, gets the puck back out to the D high or to Necas. If Necas gets the puck, he has opportunities to create. So I think what Rod's saying by that straight line game from KK is go to the net. Necas will find you. Or when Robinson's digging it out of the corner, Robinson will find you. Go to the net. Be more assertive. If KK can be an assertive, pucks on net, go to the net type player, it's going to elevate the threat of that line because then the defenders don't just have to worry about Necas as the primary offensive threats. There's other places that threat can come from and spreads out the defense a little bit more. So I just wanted to, because what you were talking about with that line getting more dangerous, I think that will be a big key in how it goes forward, because that really struck me with what Rod said last night.
Absolutely.
Well, even the other night, and I had mentioned this on X, that I thought Kotkaniemi played a solid game in Chicago. Limited ice time, but he did play a solid game. He was noticeable. And, of course, he got a goal, but he was noticeable out there. And he was making things happen. And I saw him on the boards. He was working hard. He was coming out with pucks. And he did this again last night. He was coming out of scrums with the puck and doing good things with it. And also really attending to his defensive responsibilities. And I think, he's a guy, and we've talked about him to death. But if he can get some confidence, I believe that, he can be an asset for the Hurricanes. And they're going to need him, of course, going forward. But back to this thing on Aho, and I think you're absolutely right, Erin. If Sebastian Aho doesn't kind of get back into his mojo, and we know what he's like when he's really on his game, he's involved and he wants to make a difference. We're not seeing as much of that this year, and we wonder, is there something going on? Is he injured? Is he, is there something around Aho we don't know? They've tried a lot of different line mates with him. What do we think?
Well, there were some conversations on X about whether, because they were playing in Chicago, because it was the first time they were playing against Teuvo Teravainen, that he just hasn't had somebody so far since Teravainen has left that he has that instant chemistry with,
Yes.
And I know that there were complaints about that line not necessarily, Teravainen and Aho not necessarily scoring as much at 5-on-5 as people thought. but it really didn't matter because whether they were scoring or not, they were impacting the game.
Yeah.
And the way they played together really impacted the game. And I can kind of see that. I kind of see that they've tried him with Svechnikov. He does have some of that chemistry with Jarvis for sure. But and I think that ultimately that Seth Jarvis is not going to stay on Jordan Staal's line. He's been on the top line for a good bit, and I think he'll be back up there. As soon as Will Carrier comes back. But it's just he needs that person that is someone who thinks like he does, a little bit, and he doesn't have that right now. It's the first time in a long time that he hasn't. So I don't know if that's anything, but it's possible.
Well, I think for sure that he's missing Teravainen. I don't think there's any question about that. And it might be personal, and it might be, play as well. I mean, those guys were, they were incredible. As they called them, the cherubs. They were an incredible combination. And, I remember watching some highlights of some of the things they did, 3, 4, 5 years ago. It was just incredible, the magic that they could produce. And we know how good Teravainen is in terms of setting players up. He's one of the best in the league when he's on his game. And we've seen some of that with Chicago this year. But I think that's been part of it. I think that's been a big change for him. And, sometimes we don't think about, those kinds of things, right? I mean, these are professional players. They should be rising above and so on. But there's a lot of personal elements that come into it. And I think that's still part of what might be a struggle for Sebastian Aho. And I think, he and Jarvis heading to, the Four Nations tournament, that might be a good thing. He's going to be back. Aho's going to be with the best in the Four Nations. He's going to be up against incredible competition. And maybe it's going to give him a chance to kind of kick his game into another gear. We'll have to wait and see. But if we look at the Canes right now, sorry, go ahead. Go ahead, Kate.
I just want one more point about Aho. The other thing is that I think, and this is something the coaching staff needs to look into, whenever I look at shot totals at the end of games, usually Svech is up there. Burns is definitely up there. It's kind of problematic when Burns is like the second most prolific shooter for the entire team in a game.
Yes.
And Aho's usually sitting there, 1 shot, 2 shots.
Yeah.
I know he likes to be a distributor. I know he wants to be the play creator. But just like Rod praised KK with that straight line game, I think Aho needs to bring a little more straight line to his game and shoot the puck more, because he has a really good shot and he is handcuffing himself, his line, and the team as a whole if he is not making the defense and the goalie have to respect his shot and the quality of the shot he has. I mean, that overtime goal he scored was beautiful. It just slid right past the post into the net. More of that, please. That's the kind of Aho that is dangerous and that will strike fear into opposing defenses. So, that's really what I want to see. I want to see more 4, 5, 6 shots on goal from him every single game.
Well, if you think about it, with Aho, he's a guy that, from my viewpoint, has not been as influential in the play. And I think there's something we're maybe not taking into consideration. And that is that as the Canes have been built, and as we know, the other lines weren't really as much of a defensive concern for the opposition. And so they could really pour a lot of their defensive acumen and line matching or whatever the case may be up against the Aho line. And I think that's been part of it. I think he's been getting, above average coverage simply because the other lines were not worth the effort from the opposition team in that regard. They didn't have anyone kind of striking fear into them that they might be coming out and scoring some goals. So I think there's something else there. We just have to kind of think about that. And I think it's a good segue into the next part of this, which is, as we look at the Hurricanes and we look at how they're built right now, and, we see them starting to maybe they're going to start to do a run. Maybe we're going to see them pick up their play and improve their overall position. How do we feel about them as they then head into the playoffs? Are they built the right way? Do they have the right kind of combination of players? Do they need to make some moves? And where does that sit? You want to start it off, Erin?
Sure. I think that there's always been this negativity out there about can a Rod Brindamore team actually go far in the playoffs. And this isn't just, people on Twitter. This is also national broadcasting and, people, when they comment on the Canes, especially during the playoffs, well, can we get this team? Is this team going to take the next step? I mean, they to a certain extent, when they've, the only couple of times they've made it to the Eastern Conference Final, they've been swept. So it's a fair question to ask. Can this team go far? And someone phrased it this way, that, there are teams that are built to get to the playoffs, and then there are teams that are built for the playoffs. Right. The Canes have been a team for the last 6 years, which is incredible, that has gotten to the playoffs. They are built to get to the playoffs. Yes. Getting through the playoffs, though, I think it's going to require some changes. It's going to require some changes just systematically to a certain extent. Like, with all the stuff we've been talking about finishing, that can't be where they are. Right. It's going to be, they need changes on the power play. They need to figure out what's wrong with it and kick it back into high gear. And it may be a matter of tweaking the units a little bit or getting creative with some of the structure. I mean, they're going to have to work on that. And they are. They already are. But the other thing is, are they built for the playoffs? What are they missing? We've had lots of conversations about the 2C situation, and I'm sure we're going to get to that here in a minute too anyway. So I'll leave that aside for the moment. The one thing that, I've had a couple of different things. One is I still question whether they have, right now, this year, do they have the goaltending? And it's not because I think there's anything wrong with Freddie Anderson and Pyotr Kochetkov. I think Kochetkov is showing signs of getting better and better by the minute, and he's going to continue to do that. He might be in a position next year where we have no questions about playoff goaltending. There's still been some ups and downs with him this year, though, and so I think it's fair to say, if he's the guy, is he enough? The only reason we have to ask if he's the guy, is he enough, though, is because of Freddie. When Freddie is healthy and playing well, he's got Vezina caliber numbers. He's great. But it's, can he stay healthy? And that's the question. So I don't know if that question can be answered. Certainly they're not going to make a move with goaltending now that they have Freddie back. It's not going to happen. No. So I don't know if that is just the situation and the reality they're going to go as far as this tandem can take them. Yes. And that's going to have to be okay. Yes. But for me, the other area that needs to be improved is the fourth line. Yeah. I don't think the fourth line is heavy enough. When you look at, and it depends on, I know when Carrier comes back, if they put Carrier on the fourth line, that's a different line. Yeah. They have players they can move around and make it a heavier fourth line. But you can't have, we've had a line in the recent past, now not since Blake was moved up to the top line, but you've had a line in the recent past that was Jackson Blake, Juha Jaska, and Jack Drury. Yes. These are not big, tough players. No. They got switched around against Vegas because Rod Brindamore looked at that line and said they're too small. I can't have them up against Vegas's fourth line as composed. So if they're seeing that in the regular season games, they have to be thinking about what they're going to do with that in the playoffs. What do you think, Katie?
Oh, I definitely agree as far as that's concerned. And that just kind of becomes the big question mark of, are the players that the Canes have not only suited for a playoff run, but are they currently correctly slotted in the role that they are best able to fill? And it comes down to ice time and usage and that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. I also go back to what you said about Aho not having that duo with him that he really reads and feeds off of and connects with. And so I wouldn't be surprised. I know we're going to talk the 2C thing later about that upgrade, but I wouldn't be surprised if the priority is actually a scoring winger that they feel could come in and vibe well with Aho. And, Guentzel came in and did well, but there was a lot of, there were some empty net goals and some other things. It worked, but I feel like there's somebody out there that still that Aho needs to click with, and it was like a 90% click with Guentzel. Is there somebody out there that can have a better vibe with him to help create that offense that they need? That would be what I think needs to happen, because if the fourth line gets bullied, the fourth line gets bullied, but it's not going to make a difference if your fourth line's the one doing the bullying, if your first line's not putting the puck in the net.
Exactly.
So the thing is, as the Canes are constructed now, I still think there is a path to the Stanley Cup. It's just very narrow, and they have to have everything go right for them. It's still a really, really good team.
Yeah.
That
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
if
For sure.
they can execute their game plan the way that they envision it, they can beat anybody. But
Mm-hmm.
if they're not on top of their game and they're missing in some of the small details, well, then that's when they get swept or run out of the playoffs.
Agreed.
Yeah, I think you're both right. For sure, they're going to have to add some players, and we'll talk a little bit about that now as we get into a discussion on what we're seeing out there. But ultimately, I think the Canes are going to have to, they're just going to have to get the kind of performance from their players that they would expect to get. So the top players are going to have to be their top players. I think the goaltending, boy, if the indication last night was anything of how Piotr's going to feel
great.
now, yeah, he was amazing last night. And this may be, again, it's like last year. He's not having to worry about, hey, I'm in goal again next game, kind of thing. He's got Freddie there now. He can concentrate. He didn't let in any softies. He made several 10-bell saves. He was outstanding. And as we know, if Freddie gets going the way he can and Piotr gets hot, this goaltending can take them a long, long, long
Absolutely.
way, for sure. So to me, that's one of the biggest things that can drive the Canes deep into the playoffs. I mean, goaltending, as we know, we've talked about this with Vasilevsky and other goalies who simply won the day when it gets into the playoffs. And maybe the goaltending can be a big part of this. And if they can get their power play going, I mean, obviously, again, it's those top guys have got to get their game going, and then they'll be much more dangerous. But you know what? I wanted to pick up on that discussion about the center spot, and it's time for us to discuss the rumor mill. So this week, of course, there has been a lot of chatter, and boy, we're sitting on the edge of our seats to see if something was going to happen. And actually, it all kind of was fueled by some comments from Elliot Friedman. And let's listen to what he had to say.
I do think now that I've heard about it a little bit more, I think Carolina's around there. I think the Rangers are still around there.
So, as you can hear, Elliot suggests that among the teams that are currently discussing JT Miller's possible potential opportunity to join their teams, of course, the Rangers at the top, but the Hurricanes right in the mix. And he stated very clearly that the Hurricanes were one of the teams that he thought could be a serious contender. JT Miller, a lot of folks have different views. I know, Erin, you've got a particular view. We'll pick that up in a minute. I just want to pass on a couple of stats that I think are interesting with Miller. And sure, he's definitely got some emotion issues. And, he reminds me a lot about a guy that we used to have and who I think played extremely well for us, and that's Tony DeAngelo. He's a fiery guy. He wears his emotions on his sleeve. But this guy, his numbers are amazing. In the last 4 years, if you look at the stats that he's played, in 242 games, he's got 284 points. So, I mean, that's an amazing number and a plus 40. By comparison, Aho in 232 games had 237 points. I guess the comment that I would raise here, we know that Miller is an offensive juggernaut. He can drive big numbers. He's done that for sure, and he can score. The concept that we played with was, wouldn't it be interesting if the Canes had two Aho-type quality players at the center ice role, and what the difference that would make to the Hurricanes? So whenever you think about adding a guy of the quality of a JT Miller, of course, it changes all the rules for you, notwithstanding the person, notwithstanding anything else, just the capability that this man has. But let's talk about that. What do we think about potentially adding a guy like JT Miller, and what do we think it's going to cost if the Canes can make that happen? Erin?
Well, the cost factor has been going all over the place, and I know that most people agree that it's going to take a couple of roster players just from the cap space perspective. The Canes can't really make the deal based just on futures unless, because we were talking about Eric Tulsky here, I never rule out the possibility that he has a way to do things that would not require him to give up as much as people think, because this is Eric Tulsky. So it would probably cost Kotkaniemi and Roslovic. It would probably cost a prospect, and it would probably cost a draft pick.
Yes.
Corey Pronman, who I don't particularly think is very accurate in his assessments, thinks that the prospect would be someone like Nikita Artymonov. I don't think so. I think Artymonov is too high caliber of a prospect for the Canes to hand it over in exchange for a center who is, after all, going to be 32 years old in March.
Right.
So this is something that I know that we've had our disagreements about whether Miller would be a good fit for the team. Personality stuff, the locker room impact, that's a concern. I don't think you can brush that aside. But for me, the bigger concern is the value of the contract over the 5 years that it still extends. He's being paid $8 million a year for the next 5 years. He has a full no-move clause and a no-trade clause that kicks in as well. So we're talking about somebody who you have to buy him out to get rid of him within a couple of years. So right at the time that his biggest age-related regression may be kicking in, he may become a very expensive problem to handle if his numbers do fall off the way they generally do. Now, some people on the HF Board's website were sharing an article about age-related regression in forwards and how dramatically they drop off at certain points, below, over age 30, really, starting younger than we think. And you kind of, to me, I think there's that veteran effect where a player continues to be very effective, even if his scoring touch has gone down. He's still really savvy about getting to the net. He's got all those moves figured out. But this was a very well-researched and very stat-heavy article that was shared that showed that, just how much they drop off and why it's not a good idea in general to take on or to give long contracts to forwards over the age of 29 or 30.
Sure.
The article was written by somebody you may have heard of. His name is Eric Tulsky. He wrote this article for SB Nation several years ago. So I look at this whole situation. The chatter is there. Are the Canes going to be interested? Of course they're going to look at it because they're always in on everything and they always look at it. But when it comes to that moment of pulling the trigger, I have to ask seriously, is Eric Tulsky going to take on that contract for this team, given his own research into the impact of age-related regression on forwards? And he has a companion article about defensemen too, but that's that gets into more than just scoring, so it's way beyond our scope here. But this is a man who knows what age-related regression does to players and has studied it in some detail and has shared those thoughts publicly. I just don't see it. So we'll see. What do you think, Katie?
I definitely don't have as deep of an insight there, but my instincts say that the only thing going for Miller as far as what the Canes need is the offense. Yeah. He's not a fit for the rest of the Canes system. Yeah. He's not a 200-foot player. He'd have to be babysat by somebody. You'd have to worry about, things going the other way. And if you're trading Kotkaniemi, you worry about the size of the Canes and their effectiveness in the playoffs if you don't have those big bodies to put out there when needed outside of Stahl and Martinook. So it trickles beyond just Miller and the scoring he would provide. It's the defense, it's the fit in the locker room, which I think is a bigger deal because the Canes have a very niche type of personality that they're looking for to fit with their team and work with the team. And if that fit isn't there, they're more than happy to move on from that player. Just ask the ones that have been traded that are off in other locales now.
Sure.
So all of those factors come out. I just don't see how you have the contract situation, the locker room situation, the defensive impact, the getting smaller in other areas of the forward court. It's just a whole bunch of other negatives that line up to say that this would not be a wise move for the Canes.
And one other thing, if I can piggyback off of that, Katie, my own personal thoughts about the matter aside, I do think that one of the serious questions about an offensive guy like JT Miller is, will that translate to the Carolina Hurricanes? This is not a question of Miller's skill. This is not a question of his obvious ability to generate offense. But, you look at Vincent Trocheck, who was held to 51 points on the Canes and then went to be 70, 75, in New York. some of the criticisms of the Canes' offensive systems in that the sheer weight of defensive responsibility that is placed on our forwards that keeps them from hitting those eye-popping numbers offensively. I mean, I don't think that Sebastian Aho would remain a point-per-game player, merely a point-per-game player in another system. I think he would be far beyond that. One of the ongoing discussion points we've had about Martin Necas is he going to re-sign with the Canes, or is he going to go somewhere where he can be a 100-point guy? Because there's no question that in a system that doesn't expect you to be handling half of the defensive work, on the ice, maybe he could be. So does JT Miller come in and remain a 90 to 100 or even point per game scorer, or does he drop off significantly? And at that point, all those other questions you raised, Katie, become a much bigger concern. It's not like the Canes wouldn't benefit from having a 60-point center. Yeah. But would they benefit from having a 60-point center who gives up 55 goals the other way?
Well,
because that's a realistic question.
A couple of comments, and I think sometimes we don't have all the information. Okay,
sure.
That's the first thing. We don't know a lot about JT Miller, but I'll tell you a little bit about him. First of all, he's 6'1" and 218. He's not a little guy. He's a solid player that's going to go in and he can muck it up with anybody. Let me read what the hockey forecaster said about this young man. The supremely versatile forward has blossomed into a consistent offensive force after several seasons of teasing teams with his skill and size. His off-the-puck play has improved, and he's gotten better at using his size to good effect in winning board battles. He can play anywhere up front and in any situation, and is also a rare forward who can play more than 20 minutes a game on a regular basis. This guy is a player. He's a player. There's no question.
There's a question. That is another question, though, because when you talk about the ice time, the way that Brind'Amour distributes ice time among his forwards is not like it is on other teams. Will Miller play 20 minutes a night?
Oh no, I don't think it's saying that he would necessarily have been playing. He can though. I think that's what they're saying. Sure. Is this guy can play in all situations. He can play big minutes. He can play tough minutes. I guess where I'm going with this is this, and it's kind of what I've been saying all along. There isn't a perfect fit for the Hurricanes. Okay, we've struggled to find any possible centers that could come in and make a material difference for any period of time. One of the things about Miller that's enticing, of course, he does have a contract with term on it. And this is something that Tulsky likes. So you've got, yes, he's over 30, that's true, but he does have a contract with some term. And if you look at the center availability out there, and this is the biggest single problem, if you think that the Canes can go and win a cup with their existing team and that Kotkaniemi is now going to blossom into this great center, then that's fine. Then no move is necessary. But if you feel like the Canes are going to have to improve at center, and we've talked about this a lot, your choices aren't out there. Your choices for an offensive center, a top center of any form or shape, they just aren't out there. And certainly not with term.
I think the problem is that, and again, we're not inside these discussions. We have no idea what they're weighing or not weighing.
Right.
But I think that the problem here too, though, is that we're looking at a situation where the Canucks may be their own worst enemy in this trade. Yeah. They've definitely been, there's lots been out there in the media about this and that. They were first, it was Pettersson or Miller, and then, when 31 teams called to ask about Pettersson, they backed off and said, no, actually, we just want to move Miller. Now they are actually putting the brakes on it being a fast, it was going to happen immediately. He was going to go to the New York Rangers, and then all of that allegedly fell apart. So what Tulsky, what the general managers of these other teams are looking at, that's Drury in New York, I guess, and
yes.
What they're going to do is they're going to say, okay, we're not paying top dollar mid-season for a player you feel that you have to move.
Oh, for sure.
So then the Canucks are coming back and kind of saying, well, we might just wait and ride out the season and move him in the summer.
Possible.
If that happens, though, and I know that you're concerned about the Canes finding anybody, if that happens, in the summer, you're talking about a picture of other centers potentially being available and the Canes having a boatload of cap space to work with. That's something I expect Eric Tulsky, with his incredible intelligence, to be all over and to be saying, do we want to make a move right now for this player, given the drawbacks of his age and everything else, or do we want to get through this playoff round with the guys that we have, again, knowing that Burns is about to be finished, knowing that Nikishin is coming next year. I don't know that they would rush to add Miller unless they could get him at a bargain, and they might be able to do that. It's possible because of the Canucks putting themselves in this position. But I don't see them surrendering more than they're prepared to trade.
Yeah.
You know, and the question of Kotkaniemi and Roslovic is pretty much, I mean, I think that's a given. If that was all it took, they would definitely do it. They're not going to give up prospects that they want to keep. They're not going to give a first.
Or even a first. I don't think that's
No, they're not going to give a first-round draft pick. It's an overpay for a situation where the Canucks are in the desperate situation. They're the ones that have to make the deal. It's not the other way around.
Well,
and then on top of that, Miller has the control. He gets to say where he goes.
He has the control. I guess the comment is this. If we, next week, if a deal is done and JT Miller is playing for the Hurricanes, I'm going to be a pretty happy guy. So,
I know.
And even if they give up a first-round pick, the first-round pick at 30 or 31, who cares? They got tons of those guys. They got lots of prospects. That's not a big deal. So I don't really worry about that. Now, they could do it and pick up another player. Now, one of the guys I like is this Niels Höglander, who's had a terrible year. I think they could get Höglander thrown in, and then they got another guy that can help the forward ranks. But having said all this, I think you're right. Adam Gold told us the other day it's not happening. So that's the Bible. So we don't have to worry about it.
Now, I think we all agree that Gold may not know, but yeah.
I doubt he knows. Because Adam did suggest that he wasn't going to go. Look, I don't necessarily think it's going to happen either. It's a good, fun discussion to get into. He is an excellent player, all things considered. Whether he lasts 3 or 4 or 5 years, who knows? We haven't got a clue. He could be just as good in 4 years as he is today. We don't know that. Look at Jordan Staal. He's still trucking along, and he's doing some good work. So these guys, I guess now they are in better shape longer. They do different things now in terms of their care, and so we don't know. But having said that, I still think the Canes need to shore up at center, and I think they need to do it this year if they're going to do anything at all. So the next guy we're going to talk about is going to be Brock Nelson. So I wanted to put this on. This is Frank Saravelli from Daily Faceoff. He did a big piece on Brock Nelson recently, and at the end of the piece, he talked a little bit about the Hurricanes as being a possible suitor. Let's listen to what Frank has to say.
I think Brock Nelson would make some sense in Carolina. We just talked about Carolina and JT Miller. I think he's probably, again, more than Carolina would want to spend. They didn't even give up a first for Gensel last year. I'm not sure that they'd be giving it up for Brock Nelson, but they do have the prospects to be in the mix.
Okay, so Frank basically saying that he's not sure the Canes would want to do a deal for Nelson with the Islanders simply because he thinks it would be a good move, but would they be willing to give up as much as the Islanders would be looking for? Certainly, he felt like the Canes had the prospect base to do it, but he wasn't sure that they'd be willing to go that far in a deal. He said, interestingly enough, they didn't even throw a first-round pick in the deal for Jake Gensel last year. So, in any case, here's a guy that 3 years of 30 goals and more the last 3 years, of course, for Brock Nelson. He's a little older. He's in at 33. He's an unrestricted free agent at the end of the season. But to your point, Katie, he brings a lot of size. He's a big man. He's in at 6'4" and 200-plus pounds. He's a big guy. He can play. What do we think about the Canes doing a move to grab Brock Nelson?
I definitely think his game is a better fit for the Canes. Now, it always gets a little bit tricky. They made it happen last year with Gensel, with somebody who was another Metro Division foe. But my experience the past little while watching trades happen is usually teams prefer to deal with teams that are not their direct competition in the division. So that could make it a little bit more tricky. But the Nelson option, I think, just fits where the Canes are at better. Like you said, his contract will be up. if it works out, then great. Keep him around for another reasonable length contract. That's not all the years that Miller would be around after this season. If it doesn't work out, he can go find a new home, and the Canes have the cap space to build what they need to build over the offseason. So, and like you said, the size is also good. I think the temperament also would fit the Canes better.
Sure.
The Islanders' style of play suggests that it would be an easier transition into the Canes system if he were to come over here. So I like this idea a lot better than I like the JT Miller suggestion.
I like it too, Katie, and I think it's for very many of the same reasons. I think Brock Nelson from he's going to fit right into that locker room. There's no question whatsoever. He has the work ethic, and he doesn't quit on games where he doesn't think things are going well. He's gonna give you exactly. I think he is what the word that comes to mind is the word that Rod Brindamore is using all the time these days: consistent.
Yes.
He plays a consistent game. It's just there every night. The effort, the execution, it's all there. He's much more of a Hurricanes fit to me than Miller for those reasons. And I think that, when it comes to the difference in between Miller's offense and Nelson's offense, I don't think that's the biggest consideration, because I think that what Miller brings is very, like you said, Katie, it's kind of narrow. It's one thing, and Nelson brings everything. He's got some good offense. He's still putting up good numbers at his age, and he's doing the work. So you put him on a team where, he doesn't necessarily have to be the only guy doing some of that stuff. No offense. But no, I mean, it's, and there again, too, you said that the good thing about the, not having to take on the long contract, I wouldn't even be surprised, depending on what negotiations would happen and whether or not, the Canes would be willing to move a roster player. Maybe they would do a sign and trade.
Right.
They might. And if the Islanders could facilitate that, they might get a player back from the Canes that will help them going forward, because they're not in the tear it down and do a full rebuild, regardless of whether their fans think that they should be. I know the fans want that, but they're not in that mode. They're not in that we're going to tear it all down and sell off everybody, and get a full rebuild from the ground floor. They don't even have the prospects in the system to begin thinking about that kind of rebuild. So. But, that might be a very attractive option for the Islanders, to take a roster player, in exchange and to facilitate a sign and trade with a division rival. So, I mean, it all depends on whether it's the right fit or the right move at the right time. But I think that has a better chance. But I will agree with Tom that the one big holdup, the big issue is, everybody is going to want Brock Nelson. Every contender out there is going to want Brock Nelson. There could be a bit of a bidding war, and we all know that that's when the Canes step away and say, what, we're good. So, sadly, as much as I think that could be a really good move for the Canes, it just depends on whether they're willing to put the assets forward that it would take.
Well, I think the challenge, too, is you're looking at having to give up a roster player in any case, because you've got to get the cap space. You've got to somehow get the cap space. So it's a bit of a challenge. I mean, it would be great if they could pick up Brock Nelson and also keep Kotkaniemi, because then they could roll Kotkaniemi on the fourth line, which would give them some big centers to try to do some heavy lifting. But again, I agree with you. I like Brock Nelson. He's been a guy that I've always appreciated. He plays a solid game, and he's a guy that can make things happen. And he's been a Canes killer, as I've mentioned a number of times in the past. So it'd be nice to get him on our team. Anyway, those two guys, I think, are certainly, their discussion points. The Canes, if they're going to do something at center, as I've mentioned, there's not a lot of guys. We have talked about O'Reilly. We've talked about Nazem Kadri. We don't really know what's going to happen here, but certainly as we kind of head towards the Four Nations tournament, we could see some activity. Now, the other area that you talked about, Katie, is on the scoring side. And we had picked up a little bit of a discussion on a couple of guys with the Kraken, and that's former Av, of course, Burakovsky, and we talked a little bit about Oliver Bjorkstrand, the Maestro. So what are we thinking about those guys? Do we think they're still possible fits for the Canes, or do we think we need to get something a little bit tougher?
I think that Burakovsky is probably not a fit, and that has more to do with his injury history The Canes need somebody who can come in and stay in, and he's just, for some reason, he comes in and he's just likely to, especially when games get physical, just doesn't, he just gets hurt.
Too bad.
So as good as his shot is, as much heart and effort he plays with, I mean, his actual game itself would fit the Canes quite well. And he does have some of that finishing that they need. I think Bjorkstrand would perhaps be a better option there. Definitely because he is a finisher. Yeah. And I think that his game would work well and he'd be more likely to stay in the lineup.
Agreed.
Yep. Well, and I think Katie, I was going to say, I think Katie's onto something with the whole, if they don't make a move to change center before the playoffs, which that does not mean they won't make one over the summer, but if they decide, you know what, that's not the most pressing item on the table, we have other things we need to do. If that's the case, then I could see that they would go for, they're going to be looking at all of the potential wingers that are available, because if you can't find somebody that fits with Aho, then you've got a line that isn't working that needs to be working. So, yeah. But I don't know who's out there. We talked about the Penguins maybe having a fire sale, but
I don't think there's much there.
No, not since they said not these 5 players, and it's the 5 players everybody wants.
I would only be
anybody
interested
but
mostly
these.
in a Brian Rust or somebody like that, and you're not getting that guy. So
no, you're not.
No, I agree. That's the bigger challenge, and that's the thing that we sometimes kind of have to put back into the mix. Players are going to be available. And if they're made available now, they may not be available in the summer. Okay, so that's the interesting thing. And you have to, when you're sitting in Eric's seat and he's going through these, machinations and, what's plan A, B, C, and D. He's looking at this because, again, to your point before, I think, Erin, was that, he's going to look at players in the summer and he's going to figure out, which ones he wants to target. There's not a lot of quality centers that people are willing to give up. That is the tough part. If you've got a great center, you're not about to trade them off because most teams don't have the depth to kind of fill for that person, and you're not going to get much back because the team that's acquiring doesn't have the assets in the first place, right? From a center perspective.
One name that comes up, one name that has come up that we haven't talked about is a little too much, although I think we maybe touched on him briefly, whether the Buffalo Sabres will make Dylan Cozens available.
Oh, we've talked about
that would be a very interesting move for the Canes because I think Cozens has a lot of potential and hasn't really taken off necessarily. But I don't know enough about him. He's a young player. I don't know enough about him to say whether he would or would not fit with the Canes. But that might be a move that they would actually be willing to spend some money on if they thought that he was the player they wanted to get. So.
Oh, for sure. I'm all over Dylan Cozens, and I mentioned him previously. I think he's a great young player. He's one of the few young centers you might get.
Mm-hmm. And that may be more what they're thinking if this doesn't, if they don't end up landing Miller and they don't decide to go for Miller, whichever one it is. They might be thinking we want to build for the team that's going to be around, Nikishin's age and, all these other young Jarvis's age, they may want to be starting to build for that core. And it's a transitional point. That's why we keep saying that word, transitional year. Right now, there aren't as many older veterans on the Canes as there have been in the past. And there's going to be fewer of them next year once Burns leaves. So, and speaking of Burns, just for the one thing that we didn't touch on in the trade rumors, I'm hearing some rumblings, and it's not anything concrete, but there are some observers of the Carolina Hurricanes who are convinced that the move the Canes will make at the trade deadline is going to be for a defenseman. And you look at our defensive core and you say, well, why would they do that? But then you can kind of see it. So now I don't know who they would target or who's even going to be available, but it's interesting to me because most people would say, well, the Canes are set on defense. They don't need a defenseman. But there is a certain amount of risk going into the playoffs with a 39-year-old top pair D. And there's a certain amount of risk in going into the playoffs with the Ghost Walker pairing. So
yeah, I think you're right. And just to comment on that is that most teams do pick up a defenseman at the deadline. Mm-hmm. It's just It's just what they do because of injury, right? If
Right.
they have an injury,
Yeah.
and the Canes don't have the depth, we've seen that they don't have the depth right now in
In the
Chicago.
defense.
They want to bring up for a playoff run. So I think you're right. I think you're totally right. The bigger concern I would have, I certainly hear your challenge in terms of Burns. Gostisbehere has struggled with injury, and we know that's always a concern with
Yeah.
him, and he's more brittle than you think. I'm delighted with Sean Walker. I think he
Oh,
is
yes.
a wonderful
He was
defenseman,
great
and I
last
wish
night.
they would move him up to the second pairing, and I wish they would do that now. But that's
You know
okay.
what
That's
was-
a discussion.
You know what would set the Twitter X verse absolutely aflame, that would be a bargain for a seventh defenseman, is that there's a certain former Canes defenseman that has returned back to North America from Russia.
He has?
And
When?
there's a report he got into
Oh,
some
no.
sort of kerfuffle with the coaching staff in Russia, and he's coming back to North America, not necessarily to the NHL, but you talk about at the last moment, signing. That teams do this all the time. League minimum
Right.
contract, veteran who wants one last shot at the NHL before
I
it's
think
time
he'd be
to
a
call
great
it
signing.
quits.
Yeah.
And I think, at the beginning of the season, he wasn't great last year, but he was more than serviceable as a seventh defenseman when Pesci
Sure
got
was.
hurt in that
He was.
that
He actually,
playoff
yeah.
run.
He was
And
good in
So
that run.
if you're talking
Yeah.
about the Canes looking for somebody that knows the system, somebody that can help run the power play, so if Ghost gets hurt again, you're not having to rely on Ty Smith running your power play,
Oh, my.
and would be a bargain, and
Yeah.
you're not having to trade anybody for him. You're not
No.
having to trade picks or prospects or anything. You
Nope.
keep that whole stable. Just saying it, like I said, it would set a whole lot of people off one way or the other
Yes,
on Twitter
it would.
in either rage or choruses of hallelujah. But it's
That's
just
funny,
something
Katie.
to consider since he's coming back over. The Canes could get him for
Nothing.
nothing.
Well, you've absolutely made my day. I love Tony. I think he's a great player, and I think he played well for the Canes. He played very well for the Canes. And you're right. He's a guy that they could sign, bring him in. He wouldn't even miss a beat. And he left on good terms. I mean, there wasn't a question of whether or not he'd done some things he shouldn't do. I think that's great, and I'd love to see him back for sure. But I think in any case, the Canes will bolster defense, and they'll do it just because it's normally done
Well, I
at the
mean,
playoffs.
like you said, otherwise they're calling up Riley Stillman or Ty Smith, and that's
They can't do it. They can't do it. And Scott Morrow and the other young guys are not ready. So I think for sure there's something that could be done there. So lots of discussion. We're going to get more and more as we get towards obviously the Four Nations tournament. And then the deadline is just 2 weeks after that tournament ends on the 20th. So we're going to have a lot of excitement as we head into February. And for sure, the Canes will be in the middle of it because anything that's significant, they're definitely in conversation.
they're always part of the conversation. Yep. Mm-hmm.
For sure. Okay, as we wrap up, ladies, final thoughts. Erin, what do you got?
Well, like I said, I'm proud of them for making that 3-game win streak happen. Now let's make it 4. News. I saw a brief comment this morning on X about Elvis Merzlikins leaving practice with a possible injury.
Okay.
Now it may be nothing. That may be nothing. It could be a stinger that he'll be fine. But that's something to keep an eye on for is it tomorrow night's game? Yeah, tomorrow night's game, Thursday's game,
yeah.
because whenever we upload this. And so that'll definitely show us the outcome. That could influence the outcome of that game. They could make it a 4-game winning streak, and wouldn't that be exciting? I just want to see them continue to get more aggressive offensively, and I think that is something Katie thinks too. So,
Yeah. They have 8 games remaining between now, starting with the Columbus game and the Four Nations tournament. So what I really want to see is a big push from them. I want them to enter that break on a high note, feeling good, a little bit of a roll. Ideally, I want
Absolutely.
6 out of the 8 games to be in the win column. I think
Wow.
that's really 5, fine. Don't want it to be 500 though. I don't want them to be going back to the
4 wins, 4 losses.
seesaw. Oh, we won. Oh, we lost. Oh, we won. Oh, we lost. No, let's
Yeah,
get
no
off
more
the
of that.
seesaw Let's get off the seesaw and start making some progress, and padding our points standing a little bit better. So that's really what I'd like to see, at least 6 out of the 8 wins. And it's a mix of teams that they're facing. You know, they're going to be facing off against both of the New York teams, and the Rangers are starting to get hot again, but they're also going to be facing off against Utah and Chicago, which are a little bit weaker. Of course, last time we saw Chicago, it wasn't we did. We beat them. Still wasn't the game we wanted to see. Like, they should not have had to go to overtime against a team like Chicago. They pulled it out eventually. But so it's a mix. They're also going to see Winnipeg, and Winnipeg's one of the hot, strong teams in the league right now. So it is a mix, and it's 4 home games, 4 away games, two different 2-game road trips. So they have a lot of opportunity here. It's not like they're facing the easiest schedule, but they're not facing the hardest schedule either. There's lots of opportunity for them to get those 12 points or so in the standing before going into the break and feeling good about themselves. So that's what I'd like to see. I really just want them to enter the break healthy and with some extra points in the standing.
Healthy is important.
Yes,
well, for sure. And I agree. And I think, if they can continue to play the way they're playing right now, and they'll get the goaltending, I'm feeling pretty good about that. They should definitely be able to win 5 or 6 games over that period of time. And I think that would set them up nicely for a final run at the end of the season. So, things are definitely, I think, trending in the right direction. They've got some areas to work on, as we discussed. But for sure, we'll be following it closely, and we'll be getting together again very, very soon. As always, ladies, it's great to talk hockey with you, and we've got lots to be thinking about these days with the rumor mill swirling, and with, of course, the Canes starting to mount some wins. So, for those of you who have been watching or listening, as always, we thank you very much for joining us. If you like this episode, please press the like button. If you have any comments, please leave those below, and the 3 of us will try to respond as quickly as we can. For those of you who want to be alerted of future episodes, please subscribe and press the button as well, and you'll be made aware of any future episode as it's released. Again, thanks so much for joining us right here on Storm Tracker. We'll catch up real soon.